Good morning, everyone. So I'm Dr. Judith Anne, and today I'm going to start by sharing a small event that actually changed the course of history, or rather, I would say, our story today. So in 1848, we had the first Seneca Fall Convention, and that Seneca Fall Convention primarily addressed an idea that was considered outrageous at that time. Any guesses? The idea was on equal rights for women along with men. The right to have access to the same education and the right to vote. Something really atrocious for women to actually talk about. Simultaneously, in British India, we had the Phule couple that were basically talking about the idea of access to education for the girl children who were denied an education simply because they were born female. Two incidents in the 19th century, but the same issue. The right to have access to education and the idea of human security. Fast forward today, we live in times when technology is at its swing, advancing at a much faster pace. And in that, how is that really impacting our human connections we are all already aware of? It is impacting our social relations. It is impacting our consumption habits. It is also impacting how we are engaging in our politics, in our ethics, and whatnot. So therefore, an important question arises today, and I call all of you to ponder upon this. Is human security really an attainable goal? And this becomes the basic question for our survival today and for the generations of tomorrow. How do we ensure that? And I believe that the answer lies with us together, as we all are the stakeholders in that. As individuals, as society, as well as how the states and the international community views the idea of human security. So I say that it is all of us as stakeholders who can actually make a difference, starting from small steps. So to take this forward, I would like to gauge our collective awareness to something that I actually practice during my classes. So I will be taking some names, and those of you who are aware of these individuals can just raise your hands. Sojourner Truth, Tarabai Shinde, Savitri Phule, Mary Wollstonecraft, Periyar, Ambedkar. Many of you know Ambedkar. That's because it's very political nowadays, yeah? But many of you did not knew Sojourner Truth, Tarabai Shinde, Mary Wollstonecraft, even bell hooks, for that matter. Now, all these men and women actually led the fight for human security. And they all had something in common. And that was a common experience that actually brought all these legacies together. And that experience is of discrimination. Now, this common experience of discrimination actually fueled that change, and therefore we see that how their personal experiences of pain were translated into the universal language of rights. So therefore, whatever rights that we are enjoying today is the collective effort of these men and women that I just mentioned. And it becomes our responsibility to get together today that how do we take this journey ahead for the present times as well as for the future, with the ways in which we think that how the world is rapidly changing, right? So the next aspect is that how these individuals changed that journey for us, and therefore I would like to share certain personal experiences in terms of how my journey also became rooted in the idea of being political, being aware, and then talking about the idea of human security. So I was born into a family where both my parents were from different religious backgrounds, and my family actually reflected the mini India, right? So, a mother being an Anglo-Indian Christian, my father being a Hindu, my family was literally a mini India. We celebrated almost, and even now we celebrate majorly all the festivals. But in that point, my family also became a space in which we had discussions on the meanings and relevance of festivals, of traditions and customs in our society today. And why do we have these practices? Apart from all of this, my family also became a space for me to observe and to assess the practices that were there in the family on both the sides. So I remember as a young child, I was around 7 or 8, I used to observe my mother rushing back from work. She was a working mother. She worked outside and then she came back home and she worked inside the home as well. So she would prepare dinner, taking care of our homework, putting us to sleep, then getting up in the morning, the first person, getting things in order, in place, right? But what I observed is that my father was not partaking in the household chores. So one fine day, I asked my father that why is it that I see my mother, engaging in household work while you come, you sit and you relax. And that is a reality that was seemed as normalized, okay? But then that also got my father thinking. And visibly then, the household work was divided. Now this I did, this observation and questioning of mine at the age of 8, 7 or 8, actually made a difference. Now this questioning I did when I never actually had any formal understanding of how a family should be functioning as per the norms of the society, right? Neither did I have any understanding of the idea of patriarchy at the young age of 8 years. Neither was I aware of the feminist school of thought. However, my observations and my questioning led to that difference within my family. And therefore, this personal experience of mine remains anecdotal in terms of how the feminist scholarship or how the women's scholarship has added to this journey of rights that we are bearing the fruits of today. But my journey did not stop there. As I transitioned in age, I moved on for my higher education. Specifically, there was another experience that actually changed my entire orientation, and that made my life much more political. And that experience was the experience of sexual assault, specifically on my way to school. And that experience changed many things in my life. And that also, that specific incident, left me shocked. I was very disturbed. I was angry. So many emotions that I felt. However, but I also led to think and act on it, that how I could change this. And in that moment, I decided that this has to be narrated. I have to go and talk about what I experienced to my family, to my friends, to my teachers. And in that instant, slowly and gradually, as far as I remember, I got engaged in a lot of these awareness activities. So as a young student in Delhi University, studying political science, and later on at Jawaharlal Nehru University, these specific spaces gave me the understanding of the experiences that I personally had. So these spaces, along with the teachers or the people that were there, it gave me that political language to articulate the experiences. And therefore, I take this forward in terms of how then I was able to then link with associations with people who were addressing violence against women and girls or discrimination against women and girls at a societal level. So I was part of a lot of training programs, part of gender sensitization programs. And one thing actually struck me, that a lot of these gender sensitization programs had sessions led by women for women. And this is something that I felt was a huge gap, because gender sensitization requires men and boys to journey along. And therefore, in that instance, there were more and more workshops and sessions that were then planned to include boys in the conversation. And therefore, this is what I specifically then translate into the idea of how do we really bring about change. And I put it in the framework of GPS. Global Positioning System is something that you are aware of, right? But I'm not talking about global positioning system. I'm talking about governance, politics, and society. Therefore, the idea that how change is required when we are taking into consideration all of these three aspects. And none of these are, independent. They are interrelated. So my personal experiences, along with the contributions that are made by all of these stalwarts that are the names that I mentioned today, I was able to bring up this framework of GPS that then talks about the idea of human security. So if every individual, the society, the state, the international community is rooted in the idea of human security, then governance, our politics, and our society would automatically start to bear fruit. So matters related to mindset change, matters related to prevention of violence, matters related to access to health, education, all of this become policy directives. And therefore, in this lens, I argue that the feminist lens for security has to be redefined. Because now, the times that we are living in is highly paradoxical. While we are sitting right here, we are aware the nations are bombing each other, right? So while we are talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, the reality remains that SDG 5, that is Sustainable Development Goal on gender justice or gender equality, is actually not achievable for the next century. That means 100 years. But with the way the world is, with the way wars and conflicts are increasing, it only pushes the SDG agenda backward. So the reality is, how then all the stakeholders try and talk about the idea of human security? And therefore I say it is only possible when we put back the human into the idea of human security from all the levels that I just mentioned. Therefore, the feminist rethinking of security has to be taken into consideration when we are building a society for the future. So if we only think about the idea of warmongering, we can never achieve any of the SDG goals. Because if SDG 5 is pushed back, it is also fueling poverty. It is also fueling deepened inequality. It is also then raising the concerns of legitimacy of institutions and laws that are meant to protect human life. So where then can we talk about the idea of human security, specifically for the generations to come? So in that context, I would want to close this talk on the action forward. And the action remains that as individuals, as the society, as the international community, we all can be change makers. And that can only be done when we take those small steps forward in deciding that the power is within us to change and change it for good. Therefore, what is required that we need to choose education over apathy. We need to choose human security over warfare. And that can only be achieved when we have the commitment to not just secure our borders, but the commitment to secure human lives, no matter who they are. And that is a collective will that would bring that change. Secondly, the idea that I propose is that we need to invest in intersectional and intergenerational justice. This will only happen when all the stakeholders that I mentioned come together, and only in this lens we need to see that SDGs can be attained. Another aspect that I would highlight here is that how do we cultivate a generation of youngsters who are politically aware? You all need to be politically aware of the socio-economic issues or concerns that are faced in our present times. When you are aware, only then can you come up with solutions. And lastly, we need to place ethics back into our politics. And this is exactly what I do as a researcher and as a teacher, where I raise the concern in terms of how, as individuals, as institutions, we can actually make a difference. And this can only be achieved when we collectively drive that change in attaining sustainable development goals at our own level as well as at the world at large. Thank you.